The demon sits on his throne, his mind racing with the impossible reality that he is Kim Jang-cheol, an ordinary graduate school student from Korea. At least that's what he used to be before everything changed. Yesterday, in what feels like a lifetime ago, he suddenly became the Demon King Kratos, the final boss of the very game he spent countless hours playing. The irony isn't lost on him that this is actually a pretty common story in the world of gaming fantasies, but living it is entirely different from reading about it. The game he knew so well was called Paladin of Blood, and its main objective was to revive the ancient hero who had fallen into a deep, eternal sleep. Kim remembers every detail of that game world, every quest, every character, every brutal challenge that awaited players. But telling himself these facts doesn't help his current situation at all, because knowing the game mechanics and actually surviving as the final boss are two completely different things. The real problem hits him like a truck when Aides Zephyros steps forward and addresses him with a formal tone that makes his blood run cold. Aides announces that the preparations for war have been completed, his voice carrying the weight of expectation and bloodlust that fills the dark throne room. The atmosphere becomes even more intense when the prince who drinks blood, Azurat, bursts into the room with manic energy, yelling about how they should end their starvation with today's great invasion. His voice echoes off the stone walls, filled with the kind of desperate hunger that comes from years of living in a barren wasteland. Sergei, known as the Cold Monarch, walks into the throne room with measured steps, her presence adding another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. Kratos finds himself speaking the words that the original Demon King would have said, talking about the tragedy of being born in a barren land and the pain of having to eat their own kind. He declares that they should make history that will last, but even as the words leave his mouth, he feels the weight of what they truly mean. Hark, the Arch of Fog, also enters the room while Aides continues speaking about turning all their enemies into food. The Black Boulder Tyrant Ball walks in as well, his massive presence filling the doorway. Kratos feels the expectations of all these powerful demons pressing down on him as he yells out for the demon army to listen up. Every eye in the room focuses on him with an intensity that makes his skin crawl. But then something inside Kim takes over, the part of him that studied agriculture and understood the real problems facing these demons. He tells them that this war must be stopped at all costs, that from now on they will stop their attack and start farming instead. The words hang in the air like a bomb about to explode, and every single demon in the room stares at him with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. The reaction is immediate and terrifying. Everyone starts yelling that his plan is absolutely absurd, their voices creating a cacophony of anger and confusion that makes Kratos scream out in genuine fear. These demons are honestly so scary that he can barely think straight, and he realizes just how precarious his position really is. His mind races to the real reason behind his desperate decision. If they start this war, the hero, a playable character named Age Kimchi with level 9990, will receive a notification that he has started his 20th playthrough as he wakes up from his eternal sleep. Kratos thinks to himself with growing dread that if they begin this war, he will definitely die by Age Kimchi's hands. The hero is basically an unstoppable force, and Kratos knows this because he was the one who made him that strong. Kim's mind drifts back to his previous life, where he introduced himself as a graduate student taking a farming course at Korea University with hopes of becoming a rich farmer someday. He was incredibly clever, which helped him become the ace of his course in practically no time. Being the top graduate student should have been a good thing, but it actually turned into a nightmare of exploitation. He remembers how one of the workers would praise him constantly, telling everyone how clever Jang-cheol was and asking him to write various theses that would supposedly help him a lot in the future. Another worker would approach him regularly, saying he wanted Jang-cheol to help with projects because he was very good at getting things done, always laughing it off like it was no big deal. Then there was always someone telling him to plow the fields, do this task, handle that responsibility. Kim had gotten really tired of being used by everyone around him, eventually realizing that he had basically become the #1 slave of the entire department. He would drool from exhaustion, wondering what kind of life he was actually living and why he was doing all the work while the professors got all the credit for his efforts. The frustration would build up inside him until he would scream internally about all those people who were using him, fantasizing about getting revenge on them somehow. His dopamine levels had become completely depleted from the stress and overwork, and he felt like he was going crazy from the constant pressure. The only way he could get any kind of dopamine boost was through playing games, particularly one game that was super difficult and very hard to level up in. This game was so challenging that no player had ever cleared it for the 19th time, which made it perfect for someone who wanted to feel a real sense of achievement. Kim had wanted to feel that sense of accomplishment so badly that he played the game without sleeping at all, pushing himself through the first playthrough, then the second, then the 10th, and so on. Eventually, he became the first person in the world to clear Paladin of Blood for the 19th time, which filled him with an exhausted but genuine happiness. He would talk to himself, saying he was the strongest player in the world, getting excited about starting the 20th playthrough, which would be of insanely hellish difficulty. The max level in the game was 9,999, so he had spent countless hours grinding his character to reach that peak. He couldn't even remember how many years it had taken him to achieve this level of mastery, but it didn't matter because he was about to start the ultimate challenge. When he pressed the button to begin the 20th playthrough, the screen started flashing in ways he had never seen before. Kim had yelled out in confusion, asking what was happening as he felt his soul literally being sucked out of his body. The sensation was terrifying and impossible, but before he could process what was occurring, he found himself going into the monitor itself. He dropped from the sky at rapid speed, thinking to himself that this was absolutely insane and trying to tell himself to calm down because he was clever enough to figure out what was happening. Looking at himself, he realized he was blue, which meant this was his soul form. He probably wouldn't fall and die, or at least that's what he hoped. Below him, he could see the Tower of Life, which meant he had somehow entered the actual game world of Paladin of Blood. When he spotted the Tomb of the Paladin, he became incredibly excited, thinking that he was going to possess his character aged Kimchi, who was almost at max level. The prospect of living as an invincible and strong character filled him with hysterical laughter, imagining how awesome his new life was going to be. But as he got closer to his intended destination, he realized he really didn't want to turn into that particular character after all. His soul got pulled in a completely different direction, and he found himself asking where he was going and what the hell was happening to him. Now, sitting on the throne as Kratos, he sighs deeply, thinking about how this whole situation is driving him absolutely nuts. If he hadn't had that stupid thought after looking at aged Kimchi back there, he would have become the most overpowered character in the game world. Instead, he's stuck being the final boss that everyone wants to kill, which makes him feel like a complete idiot. Meanwhile, aides can hear Azurat ranting about how Kratos has definitely gotten weaker, which is why he got scared and stopped their attack. Azurat suggests that they should join hands and cut Kratos' head off, sharing the authority of the throne between them. The other demons remind him that Kratos became king by taking the head of the previous demon lord, so he's clearly capable of violence. Hart points out the logical flaw in their reasoning, asking what will happen if Kratos didn't actually get weaker. In that scenario, 2 out of the 4 great demon generals will either suffer fatal injuries or die in the attempt to overthrow him. Sergei suggests that if Azurat wants to offer himself as their shield, they can give the assassination attempt a try, which makes Azurat ask if she wants to die by Kratos' hands first. Ball, throughout this entire conversation, only thinks to himself about how hungry he is, his mind focused entirely on his basic needs rather than political maneuvering. Azurat eventually asks what will happen if there's actual evidence that the Demon Lord has gotten weaker, and everyone grins while agreeing that if that's the case, they'll definitely have to kill him. Ball continues thinking about his hunger, seemingly uninterested in the political implications. Aides remains quiet during most of this discussion, but eventually approaches Kratos to report that the morale of their army has completely plummeted. There have been more cases of demons attacking and devouring each other internally, and some have even left the land of demons without any notice. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, and everyone can sense the growing instability. Aides continues his report, explaining that the 4 great demon generals are enraged because they believe Kratos has gotten weaker, and they're planning to work together to cut his head off. Kratos shivers while thinking to himself that if all 4 of them attack him together, he'll definitely die. The math is simple and terrifying. He can't win against all of them at once, and if he appears weak, they'll kill him anyway. A thought suddenly occurs to Kratos about aged Kimchi. Since he didn't possess that character, is it just a corpse now? Maybe charging into the human world would actually be a better option than staying here and dealing with the brewing rebellion. But then Aides shows him a video from the Tomb of the Paladin that was sent by General Odmia. In the video, Odmia is screaming desperately, begging for someone to stop and help him. The footage shows something horrifying happening to him, with Odmia asking what someone is trying to do before screaming about his eyes being gouged out. When Kratos looks at aged Kimchi in the video, he realizes that won't work at all. It looks like some kind of play by a completely crazy player, and he definitely doesn't want to meet that guy. The realization hits him that he must stay in this place no matter what happens. At this rate, he'll either appear weak and get killed by the 4 great demon generals, or he'll charge into the human world where aged Kimchi will gouge his eyes out and kill him anyway. Both options lead to the same gruesome end, which makes Kratos sob while thinking about why he came into this world in the first place. He can't even find happiness in either scenario. The only possible solution would be to resolve the issue of food shortages and get the demons to calm down somehow. This realization makes Kratos get up from his throne with renewed determination. When Hades asks where he's going, Kratos responds that he's going to look at some lands for farming, which clearly confuses his advisor. Hades points out that Kratos is normally narcissistic and arrogant with zero manners, so hearing him say pardon is gross and horrifying, and he asks Kratos to please not do that again. This makes Kratos think about how annoying Hades is being. Is he trying to provoke a reaction? Was the original Kratos always such a difficult character to deal with? Kratos remembers that Zephyros appeared just once before the battle with the Demon King without any explanation in the original game, but that actually made him quite a popular character among players. In one memorable scene, Hades tells a paladin that the Demon Lord no longer wishes to fight, so the paladin should go back. When the paladin kills Hades anyway, he says that the Demon Lord should forgive him for being too weak to protect him. This memory makes Kratos realize why players thought Hades was either very loyal to the Demon Lord or really respected him. But now Hades is saying that his blunder this time was unprecedented, and that he has never met a Demon Lord who lost that much trust from the demons. Kratos thinks to himself that Hades is really annoying, especially when he continues questioning the farming plan. Hades asks if Kratos really wants to farm in the land of demons, sarcastically noting that he didn't know the Demon Lord's memory was only as good as a pigeon's. This pushes Kratos over the edge, and he reminds Hades that he's the Demon Lord and shouldn't be pushed around like this. But Hades says he'll continue anyway, which makes Kratos wonder why his subordinate isn't getting scared of his authority. The conversation continues with Hades pointing out that both the former Demon Lords and even Kratos himself have already tried farming in this land before. He reminds Kratos about the harsh conditions and temperature differences, asking if he should be well aware that nothing grows on this land, right? The land is literally called the Land of Death for good reasons. Kratos insists that he knows this land has earned its deadly reputation, but with his current abilities, it's possible to save this land and make it fertile. He thinks to himself that he really hates farming, but he needs to survive first, and this seems like the only viable option. He gets down and scrapes the floor, which makes Hades look at him with complete confusion. When Kratos eats some of the dirt to analyze it, Hades starts taking notes, commenting that the Demon Lord has become strange and is now acting like a beggar who eats dirt. Kratos yells at him to stop writing and asks what he's documenting, which prompts Hades to explain that he's just performing his duties since recording the Demon Lord's chronicles is important work. Hades continues by noting that the Demon Lord's ability to remember things has definitely deteriorated, which pisses Kratos off even more. He thinks to himself that Hades is such a pain in the ass, but he needs to focus on the soil analysis. The ground here definitely has zero nutrients and no nitrogen either, which confirms his worst fears about the farming prospects. Kratos begins explaining the science behind plant growth, noting that nitrogen is an element that is absolutely necessary for plants to thrive. Plants are unable to make use of nitrogen in the air by themselves, even though it makes up 78% of the atmosphere. This is because the atoms form solid triple bonds, making it nearly impossible for them to undergo chemical reactions under normal circumstances. He continues his explanation, noting that humanity developed the nitrogen fixation process through chemical engineering, which led to a huge increase in food production worldwide. But doing that here, in this magical world with limited technology, seems impossible. There's nothing to be used as the foundation for modern farming techniques. This means they need to make use of the nitrogen fixation mechanism that exists in nature. Kratos remembers that lightning can serve this purpose. Using its high voltage, nitrogen gets oxidized into nitrite, which then mixes with rainwater and gets absorbed into the soil. And the main technique of Demon Lord Kratos is called Bloody Strike, which explodes both lightning and moisture at the same time. The realization hits him that this technique was actually made for creating fertile soil, not just for combat purposes. He tells Hades to stand back and prepares to use the ability. As he scrapes his skin to activate the technique, he thinks about how the original Demon Lord must have been completely insane to use this painful method every time. The self-inflicted injury hurts incredibly badly. When Kratos looks back at the demon generals watching him, he can see in their expressions that they think he has definitely gotten weaker. This makes him let out a freak-out scream, which prompts Hades to confirm that he has 100% gotten weaker than before. Kratos realizes that Hades is definitely planning to assassinate him. The plan is probably to provoke him into making mistakes and then kill him when he's vulnerable. Deciding that this is better than dying without trying anything, Kratos scrapes his hand and attempts to use Bloody Strike again. Unfortunately, nothing really happens except that his hand starts bleeding from the self-inflicted wounds. He sobs in pain while the technique fails to activate properly, making his situation even more desperate. Hark asks if Demon Lord Kratos feels unwell, which makes Kratos curse under his breath at his pathetic situation. Meanwhile, the scene cuts to show aged Kimchi in his tomb, thinking to himself that it's faint, but he does have some memories of his previous life. He has lived this life more than 10 times, and he was always headed for that same place because of the summon of duty that led him there. But now something has changed fundamentally. The summon of duty no longer says anything to him, which leaves him wondering what he should live for now that his purpose has seemingly disappeared. This development adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation, suggesting that the game world itself is changing in ways that nobody could have predicted. Azurat steps forward with a menacing presence, asking Kratos if he knows the fundamental rule that governs all demons in their realm. The rule is simple but absolute: the strongest demon becomes the demon lord, and strength determines everything in their hierarchy. Kratos feels terror coursing through his entire body as he thinks to himself about how incredibly scary these demons are. Each one of them possesses such freaking incredible strength that he can barely comprehend their power levels, and the worst part is that he can't even use a single skill properly right now. The fear of death grips him completely as he wonders if this is really how his second life is going to end. Meanwhile, Azurat experiences his own internal struggle, thinking about the incredible pressure emanating from Kratos even though the actual fight hasn't even started yet. The Demon Lord is already gathering his strength to such an extent that Azurat's body begins trembling involuntarily from the overwhelming aura surrounding them. Azurat nervously questions whether Kratos can actually defeat all 4 of them in his supposedly current weakened state. When he looks back over his shoulder, he spots the other 3 generals hiding behind a large tree, which makes him think about what cowards they're being. They're clearly planning to watch how he fights and only join in if it looks like they have a reasonable chance of winning. Azurat begins sweating profusely as he calls them evil bastards, though he immediately realizes the irony of his statement since they are demons after all, and being evil is basically their nature. Hades steps forward to remind everyone about the long-standing tradition among demons that dictates all fights must be to the death with absolutely no possibility of giving up or surrendering. Both Kratos and Azurat exclaim their surprise at how quickly the formal challenge has been initiated, neither of them expecting the confrontation to escalate this rapidly. Azurat tries to pump himself up mentally, telling himself not to get scared because he's definitely going to win this fight since the Demon Lord has clearly been weakened significantly. Kratos feels incredibly pissed off as he repeatedly asks himself what exactly he did wrong to deserve this situation. Just moments ago, he had tested his own strength since logically the Demon Lord should be extremely powerful, but the results were disappointing. While he is strong compared to a normal person, it's definitely nothing to brag about when facing opponents of this caliber. Azurat suddenly dashes forward with explosive speed, declaring that he's making his move. Kratos becomes absolutely terrified as he recognizes the movement pattern from countless hours of playing the game. The attack is definitely either going to be a devastating thrust or a powerful slash, and there seems to be no possible way for him to dodge something that fast and precise. Somehow, against all odds and his own expectations, Kratos manages to dodge the attack completely. He stares in confusion, wondering how he possibly managed to avoid such a skilled strike. The answer becomes clear when he analyzes Azurat's positioning. Since his left foot is pointing outwards, it definitely means he's going to use a thrust attack. The motion is exactly identical to the movements programmed in the game. Azurat quickly backs off to reassess his strategy after the failed initial attack. Hart turns to Sergei and asks if she noticed Kratos' facial expression when he dodged that attack, noting that he looked like he was about to counterattack and tear off Azurat's arm without hesitation. Sergei responds by asking why Kratos didn't follow through with the counterattack, suggesting that they should wait and observe the situation longer before making any moves. Azurat launches another attack with renewed determination, and once again Kratos manages to dodge it perfectly. He thinks to himself in amazement about what's happening to him. All of Azurat's movements are exactly the same as they were programmed in the original game. When he first encountered Azurat as a player, he was absolutely taken aback by the character's incredible skill level. Kim remembers thinking that defeating such a powerful opponent seemed completely impossible during his early attempts. Kratos recalls that Azurat is incredibly fast, throws in feints that are completely offbeat and unpredictable, and possesses an impressively wide range of different attacks. The first time Kim fought this boss, he died repeatedly once, 3 times, 10 times, and continued failing until he finally managed to defeat Azurat for the first time on his 128th attempt. However, in the following 19 playthroughs of the game, Kim had completely mastered the fight mechanics and was able to make a complete fool out of Azurat by achieving perfect no-hit runs every single time. The pattern recognition and muscle memory he developed through endless repetition means that there's absolutely no way Azurat's attacks will ever hit him again. This realization fills Kratos with hysterical laughter, which causes all 3 of the watching generals to tremble with a mixture of confusion and fear. He continues dodging every single attack with ease while Hark observes that Kratos appears to be having genuine fun with the situation. The Demon Lord seems to be laughing at Azurat for being weak and is clearly enjoying himself during what should be a life-or-death battle. Azurat calls Kratos a scumbag out of frustration, unable to understand how all of his most powerful attacks are being avoided so effortlessly. Kratos thinks to himself that this is such a relief, though he realizes that dodging doesn't necessarily mean he can actually defeat his opponent in a proper fight. However, he comes to an incredibly important realization: this world operates according to exactly the same rules and mechanics as the original game. A notification suddenly appears, addressing Kim Jang-cheol directly and informing him that he has successfully realized the basic rule governing this world. Kratos stares at the message in shock, wondering if this is the same kind of messenger system that he frequently sees in webtoons and fantasy stories. The notification continues, explaining that he has also succeeded at dodging his enemies' attacks through maintaining high concentration levels. As Azurat charges at him once again, the notification announces that as a reward for his performance, a part of the game system that is normally used by playable characters has been unlocked for him. Specifically, the targeting function has become available, which is exactly what players use when activating special skills and abilities. Kratos looks directly at Azurat and thinks to himself that this targeting system is the same one used for executing special skills in the game. This means he should be able to properly use his Bloody Strike technique now. He scrapes his skin to activate the ability, and flames burst out from his body, engulfing Azurat and burning him alive. The 3 watching generals immediately start cheering, shouting that this is exactly what they wanted to see and calling Kratos awesome for his impressive display of power. Kratos glares at them menacingly while Azurat coughs and struggles to recover from the devastating attack. Kratos thinks to himself in disbelief that Azurat is still alive after being hit directly by Bloody Strike, which causes instant death when used in the original game. This is seriously problematic because Azurat has incredible recovery abilities, which means he'll restore his energy and health in no time at all. Kratos continues striking Azurat repeatedly with his attacks, causing the 3 generals to shiver with genuine fear as they watch the brutal display. They think to themselves that Kratos is attacking Azurat in such a way that he won't die immediately, but will instead experience maximum pain and suffering during the prolonged assault. Kratos desperately wonders what he should do since his opponent simply won't die no matter how many times he hits him. Another notification appears, informing him that he has successfully torn off all of Azurat's clothes, leaving him completely naked. Kratos thinks to himself that this is such a random and embarrassing message, asking why the system has to talk as if he's some kind of pervert. The notification announces that a new system feature has been unlocked, specifically, the inventory's armor removal function is now available. Kratos wonders if there might be some kind of useful armor stored in his inventory that he can access. When he checks his available items, he discovers that there's only the equipment he's currently wearing, and he doesn't see anything that can be used effectively in his current situation. He realizes that he needs to deal with Azurat first, but the problem is that he's not strong enough to actually kill his opponent outright. Azurat's incredible recovery ability means he'll definitely get back up after resting for some time. Then Kratos has a brilliant realization: since Azurat isn't dead, he can still target him with his abilities. He can also keep firing Bloody Strike attacks repeatedly, which means he can infuse the surrounding ground with massive amounts of nitrogen. Kratos becomes excited as he thinks to himself that he's definitely the smartest person in this situation. He looks at the 3 generals and wonders if they're definitely scared of him now. This seems like the perfect opportunity to test out his theory about the game mechanics working in this world. Kratos addresses Sergei directly, asking her to come forward. She responds with obvious nervousness, clearly intimidated by his commanding presence. He tells her to tie up Azurat very tightly, which makes Sergei think to herself that he wants her to tie up a completely naked man. She realizes that he's trying to humiliate both her and Azurat simultaneously through this degrading command. Kratos announces that step 1 of his plan is to prepare a lightning rod. At this moment, Azurat suddenly wakes up and starts screaming that the undying Azurat has completely recovered his strength. He declares that Kratos has indeed gotten weaker, since he couldn't kill him with a single bloody strike attack. This time, he promises that he'll definitely cut off Kratos' head. Kratos calmly announces step 2, which involves using bloody strike again. He thinks to himself that with this technique, he can oxidize the nitrogen in the air and convert it into nitrite, which is exactly what he needs for his agricultural plans. He then addresses Hark, telling him that he wants the entire area covered with incredibly thick fog that will be so dense that water will literally be flowing everywhere. Hark thinks to himself in horror about what Kratos is planning. Does the Demon Lord intend to make the entire area wet so that his lightning attacks will be even more painful and devastating? He realizes that this is an incredibly creative method of torture, and he feels like he's learning something completely new today about the extent of cruelty that's possible. Hark uses his magical abilities as instructed, and Kratos announces that step 3 involves spreading the fog throughout the area. Step 4 requires him to strike repeatedly and continue the pattern. Kratos keeps attacking Azurat while aides and the other 3 generals watch in fascination and terror. Kratos thinks to himself that this is absolutely awesome. With this method, he can transform the barren land into fertile ground rich with nitrogen. He imagines getting a bountiful harvest from crops grown in this improved soil, and the thought makes him incredibly excited. He continues hitting Azurat until he can pick up some of the treated soil to examine its properties. The next improvement needed is addressing the soil structure itself. The loose monovalent structured soil that currently exists neither allows oxygen to enter properly nor drains water effectively. For successful farming, crumbly granular structured soil is the ideal foundation, which is why the next thing he needs to create is high-quality manure. Kratos addresses all of the generals, telling them to bring him some shit for the soil improvement process. The generals think to themselves that after making such a brutal example out of Azurat and grilling him alive, Kratos now wants to smear the defeated demon with actual excrement. They realize that this level of cruelty is so unbelievably harsh that it exceeds even their expectations for demonic behavior. The scene shifts to show aged Kimchi walking through a dense forest when he suddenly hears someone desperately asking for help. Kimchi looks toward the source of the voice and sees people who explain that they were attacked by a dangerous group of goblins and are pleading for his assistance. They promise to compensate him properly if he agrees to help them with their situation. Aged Kimchi removes the bush that has been covering his distinctive outfit, which causes the people to exclaim in shock at his appearance. Kimchi tries to reassure them by saying they shouldn't fear him because he's not a suspicious person. However, the men think to themselves that he actually looks incredibly suspicious and horrifying, despite his attempts to appear friendly. Kimchi asks if one of them has hurt his leg, then picks up the injured person and tells them to please lead the way to wherever they need to go. The man explains that the goblins were really strong and introduces himself as Envoy Rivage Arsahan. He points out that the person behind them is his servant Dial Frontera and asks if he may know who Kimchi is. Aged Kimchi begins to respond, but Rivage interrupts him, saying that finding out Kimchi's identity is exactly what he needs to determine next. The 3 demon generals sit in uncomfortable silence, each struggling with the bizarre request that their demon lord has just made. The atmosphere grows increasingly tense as they try to process what Kratos has actually asked them to do. Hart breaks the silence first, asking the most obvious question that's on everyone's mind: how exactly are they supposed to just bring poop to their lord? Does he expect them to create it on the spot or something equally ridiculous? Sergei immediately reacts with disgust, declaring that the entire situation is absolutely crazy, gross, and thoroughly disgusting. She can't believe that their fearsome demon lord is making such an embarrassing request of his most powerful subordinates. The whole concept seems beneath their dignity as elite demon generals who should be focused on conquest and warfare. Ball contributes to the conversation by explaining that it has been quite a while since he last ate anything substantial, which means he simply cannot produce any waste material for their lord's strange agricultural experiment. His massive body requires enormous amounts of food, and without proper nutrition, there's nothing for his digestive system to process. Sergei adds that she doesn't produce waste either, which makes the request even more impossible to fulfill. However, Her contribution to the discussion makes her incredibly uncomfortable, and she immediately yells at the others not to talk about her bodily functions, calling them idiots for even bringing up such a disgusting topic. Hart points out that even if any of them were capable of producing what Kratos wants, he personally would never want to supply their lord with his own waste material. The idea is so revolting and undignified that he suggests they should beat up some of the lower-ranking demons and force them to start producing the required materials instead. This leads to a scene where they drag a terrified low-ranking demon forward and demand that he fulfill their lord's request. The poor demon begins crying and begging them not to force him into this humiliating situation. He explains that if all of them are watching him like that, he absolutely cannot perform under such pressure and pleads with them to at least wait outside while he attempts to complete the task. One of the soldiers reports that the other demons they approached said exactly the same thing, but despite the privacy, they still couldn't produce anything useful. The stress and fear of the situation, combined with their malnourished state, makes it impossible for them to fulfill the request no matter how hard they try. Hart grows impatient and asks what's taking so long, demanding to know if the demon really can't provide them with anything no matter how hard he attempts to complete the task. The demon explains desperately that he hasn't eaten anything substantial in quite a while, and he was just trying to scrape together the last bit of energy he had remaining. This gives Hart a terrible idea, and he grabs the demon by the neck while thanking him sarcastically for the inspiration. He begins to use his magical powers on the unfortunate creature, causing the demon to scream in agony. Just as Hart is about to seriously harm the demon, Ball suddenly intervenes by grabbing Hart's arm. Hart asks what Ball is doing, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Ball explains with his characteristically simple logic that if Hart pierces the demon's stomach, the creature will die, which means they won't get any waste material from him at all. He points out that they need the demons to produce more waste so they can collect larger quantities for their lord's project. Hart acknowledges that this is actually smart thinking, especially considering it's coming from Ball, who isn't known for his intellectual contributions. He suggests that if they feed the demons with meat from other sources, maybe the creatures will finally start producing the waste materials they need for Kratos' agricultural experiment. Ball glares menacingly at Hart's suggestion, while the captured demon remains frightened and trembling from the ordeal. The two generals seem ready to launch into a physical confrontation over their disagreement about methodology when Kratos suddenly screams at them, demanding to know what the hell they think they're doing. Kratos uses his magical abilities to intervene in the situation, explaining that humans aren't the only animals capable of producing waste materials that can be useful for agricultural purposes. He makes it clear that there are other sources they can explore instead of torturing their own subordinates in such a degrading manner. He continues his explanation by pointing out that there's no practical use for waste materials that have no nutritional value whatsoever. What they really need to focus on is finding waste products that can actually be transformed into effective manure for improving soil quality and supporting plant growth. AIDS asks for clarification about what manure actually is, since the concept seems foreign to demons who have never engaged in agricultural activities. Kratos explains that manure is essentially an ingredient that provides fields with essential nutrients needed for healthy plant growth and bountiful harvests. Kratos thinks to himself about the normal composition of effective manure, which typically includes wooden ashes, various weeds, soil components, eggshells, and chicken waste. For the wooden ashes and weeds, they can easily utilize materials from the empty abandoned houses they observed earlier during their exploration of the demon territory. However, the real challenge lies in obtaining eggshells and bird waste, which are crucial components for creating truly effective fertilizer. These materials are much more difficult to source in their current barren environment, but Kratos suddenly has an inspiration that might solve their problem. Kratos calls out to AIDS, asking him to bring the detailed map of their territory so they can locate potential sources for the materials they need. AIDS responds respectfully, addressing Kratos as Your Majesty while hurrying to fulfill the request. When Kratos examines the map carefully, he thinks to himself that as expected, the geographical layout is exactly identical to the one he remembers from countless hours of playing the game. This means he should definitely be able to find what he's looking for once they reach the specific location he has in mind. The location he's thinking about is the habitat of the demon seagulls, which he remembers from his gaming experience. In the original game, there were plenty of these creatures scattered all over various fields and coastal areas. Their presence indicates something very important: the seagulls must be able to ingest significant amounts of nutrients from the human lands they visit. After consuming these nutrients, the seagulls return to their nesting grounds where they produce waste and lay eggs. This makes their habitat the perfect location for gathering both the eggshells and bird waste that Kratos needs for his manure production project. Aides asks for confirmation, wondering if His Majesty is actually intending to collect the waste materials produced by demon seagulls. Kratos acknowledges that Aides is pretty quick to understand the plan, which shows that his advisor has good analytical skills despite his sometimes annoying personality. However, Aides immediately points out a significant problem with this plan. The seagull habitat is located at a place known as the cliff from which one cannot return, which has earned its ominous name for very good reasons. The cliff face has no stable handholds for climbers, and anyone who falls will inevitably get caught up in the rough, violent waves below. Kratos responds that he's well aware of these dangers, thinking to himself that the location isn't systematically available for players to reach through normal gameplay mechanics. However, he knows from his extensive gaming experience that it is possible to climb the treacherous cliff face if you know the right techniques and exploit certain game mechanics. When they finally reach the dangerous cliff, all the generals think to themselves about what their lord could possibly be planning. The location looks absolutely impossible to navigate safely, and many previous attempts have ended in tragedy and death. Kratos reflects on the history of this place, remembering that many demons have challenged themselves to hunt the seagulls since ancient times, but they all ended up falling prey to the merciless waves that crash against the rocks below. The cliff has claimed countless lives over the centuries. Kratos looks back at his subordinates and explains his plan. He will climb to the very top of the cliff and throw down bags containing the precious seagull waste and eggshells they need. He instructs them to make absolutely sure they catch the bags when he drops them, because this mission is crucial to their survival. He promises that if this dangerous plan succeeds, everyone in their territory will finally be able to eat well and end their prolonged starvation. Baal glares at Kratos while remembering all the starving demons who are depending on them for salvation from their desperate situation. Kratos thinks to himself about his 13th playthrough of the game, remembering how he tried absolutely everything possible to reach the top of this impossible cliff. He attempted the climb over 100 different times, dying repeatedly in the process and respawning to try again with slight variations in his approach. As he jumps up and clenches onto the first rocky pillar, he reminds himself that he eventually succeeded in reaching the top by discovering and abusing a specific glitch in the game's mechanics. This exploit allowed him to bypass the normal limitations and achieve what should have been impossible. Kratos calls out the command to open his equipment inventory and then unequips all of his gear simultaneously. This causes all of his clothing to disappear instantly, leaving him completely naked as he prepares to execute his unconventional climbing strategy. All of the watching generals can clearly see his exposed buttocks as he prepares for the next phase. Kratos thinks to himself that he needs to roll his body in a very specific way to trigger the glitch properly. Sergei exclaims in shock and embarrassment at the sight of their naked demon lord, unable to believe what she's witnessing. Kratos then commands his equipment to be re-equipped, causing all his clothing to reappear momentarily. Sergei steals a quick glance before looking away in mortification. Then Kratos repeats the process, rolling his body while simultaneously unequipping everything again. This bizarre sequence continues repeatedly. The generals keep seeing their lord's buttocks and outfit appear and disappear in rapid succession as he works his way up the impossible cliff face. The absurd sight is both embarrassing and mesmerizing as they watch him exploit the game mechanics to achieve vertical progress. Finally, Kratos reaches the top successfully and announces that the task is complete. He reflects on how this world operates according to the same system as the original game, including features like the equipment inventory and the supposedly unreachable edges of the map that were never meant to be accessible to players. Back in his room earlier, Kratos had checked this theory and confirmed that reaching the impossible location was indeed feasible. By putting together all the facts about how the game world operated, he had experimented with different approaches and become convinced that the cliff climb was possible with the right technique. Baal suddenly declares that since His Majesty promised to feed them all, he will climb up to help with the mission. Aides tries to stop him, asking what he thinks he's doing and pointing out that the cliff is incredibly dangerous even for someone of Baal's strength and size. Despite Aides' protests, Baal rushes forward and launches himself at the cliff face, shouting that he will follow His Majesty no matter what dangers await. However, Baal lacks the knowledge of the game mechanics that Kratos used, so he immediately begins falling toward the deadly waves below. Kratos yells out in alarm, asking what Baal thinks he's doing. When he sees Baal plummeting towards certain death, Kratos instinctively reaches out and catches the much larger demon, saving him from the fatal fall. The effort is incredibly painful, and Kratos exclaims that Ball is so ridiculously heavy that his arm feels like it's going to be ripped off completely. As he struggles with Bale's weight, Kratos suddenly questions his own actions. Why is he trying to save this guy? Ball is one of the 4 demon generals who pose a direct threat to his authority and survival. Wouldn't Kratos actually be better off if Ball were gone permanently? Kratos tells Ball that he understands there's no logical reason for him to provide help in this situation. However, as Ball looks up at him with gratitude, Kratos is suddenly reminded of a painful memory from his previous life as Kim Jang-cheol. He remembers a junior student who used to follow him around, asking desperately for help with an academic problem. The junior had explained that the professor wasn't letting him submit his essay, which meant the professor could use him as an unpaid worker forever. The junior had begged Kim to intercede on his behalf, since the professors loved Kim and respected his opinions. Kim had refused to help, thinking to himself that it was the junior's business to handle, not his problem to solve. He had been scared of potentially falling out of favor with the professors or putting himself in a disadvantageous situation by getting involved in someone else's academic troubles. Now, as Kratos struggles to save Ball, he realizes that maybe he could have helped that junior if he had tried just a little bit harder. If he had squeezed out everything he had and pushed himself to his absolute limits, perhaps he might have been able to make a difference in that person's life. The memory of the junior's disappointed face haunts Kratos as he screams with effort and reaches for Bale's hand, lifting him up with all his remaining strength. He manages to toss Ball onto the safety of the cliff, though Ball cries out in pain from the rough landing. Ball looks at Kratos with amazement, pointing out that His Majesty saved him despite getting hurt in the process and having no logical reason to take such a risk. He asks why Kratos would sacrifice his own safety for a subordinate who might eventually become his enemy. Kratos responds that saving a follower hurts much less than abandoning someone and spending the rest of your life regretting that decision. The pain of helping is temporary, but the pain of regret can last forever and eat away at your soul. Ball begins sobbing at these words, overwhelmed by his lord's unexpected compassion and wisdom. Kratos thinks to himself that this is exactly what he should have done for the junior student in his previous life. He silently apologizes to that person, repeating his regret over and over. A notification suddenly appears, acknowledging that even though Kratos is not fully adapted to the body of the Demon King, he poured all of his available strength into saving his subordinate. As a direct result of this selfless action, he has earned the sincere and lasting gratitude of Ball, one of the 4 most powerful demon generals. Kratos wonders to himself if Ball is really that grateful for being saved, surprised by the depth of emotion his actions have generated. The notification continues, explaining that in honor of this significant achievement, a new system has been established where providing his army with abundant happiness will earn him substantial points. Kratos responds with interest to the mention of earning a great amount of points, curious about how this new system will work. The final notification announces that the Happy Point accumulation system is now officially open and available for use. Kratos thinks to himself about this mysterious Happy Point system, wondering if it's something that might get him a discount for ice cream in this strange world. His mind immediately jumps to the possibility that there might actually be a place somewhere in this realm that sells ice cream, which would be absolutely amazing given the harsh conditions they're living under. The notification system responds immediately with obvious annoyance, asking what kind of fantasy game world would possibly sell ice cream to its inhabitants. The very suggestion seems ridiculous to whatever entity is managing the notification system, and the response carries a tone of disbelief at such a mundane request. Kratos thinks to himself that the sudden response really scared him, realizing with shock that he can actually have a conversation with this mysterious notification system. This opens up entirely new possibilities for understanding how this world operates and what options might be available to him as he tries to survive in his role as Demon Lord. The notification system continues its explanation, detailing how the Happy Point system actually functions in practice. For each individual soldier in the demon army who feels genuine happiness from having a full stomach, Kratos will gain exactly 1 happy point that can be accumulated over time. These points serve as a currency that can be used to purchase various stat improvements for his character. The system goes on to explain that Kratos is currently only able to access and utilize about 20% of the original Demon Lord's full strength and capabilities. The goal is to try increasing all available stats systematically in order to eventually attain 100% of Kratos' true potential power, which would make him significantly more formidable in combat and more capable of surviving the various threats he faces. Kratos decides to test the system by examining what it would cost to increase his stamina. He thinks to himself about purchasing a 10% increase in his stamina stat, curious about how expensive such an upgrade might be. The notification system responds that in order to purchase a stamina increase of 10%, he would need to accumulate and spend 50 happy points. Kratos finds this pricing structure incredibly expensive, especially considering that he hasn't earned any happy points yet and doesn't know how quickly he can accumulate them. The cost seems prohibitive given his current circumstances, but he recognizes that it represents a path toward becoming more powerful. The notification system adds that he can also use his accumulated happy points to purchase skill enhancements for his existing abilities. His current skill, Bloody Strike, is only at level 1, and the happy points needed to level it up to the next tier would be 250 points. This represents a massive investment that would require making many demons happy with full stomachs. Kratos realizes that he can't afford to do anything with the system yet given his complete lack of accumulated points. However, if he can successfully implement his farming plan and provide food for the demon army, then he should be able to gather quite a lot of happy points relatively quickly. This would allow him to become super strong and dramatically increase his rate of survival in this dangerous world. The prospect of being thanked by grateful demons for providing them with food also seems like it could feel pretty good on an emotional level. Kratos begins smiling hysterically at these possibilities, his mind racing with plans for agricultural success and the power increases that would follow. Meanwhile, Baal observes Kratos' expression and thinks to himself that his lord's face clearly indicates that he'll rip Baal apart immediately if he doesn't listen carefully to everything Kratos says. Since Baal owes his life to Kratos after being saved from the cliff, he feels completely obligated to obey. Baal concludes that Kratos is really a mean demon lord who didn't save him out of genuine good faith, but rather as a calculated move to ensure loyalty. Kratos calls out to his subordinates, explaining that he'll put the seagull waste material into eggshells and throw the containers down to them. He emphasizes that they absolutely must catch everything he throws, because these materials are crucial for their farming project and cannot be wasted. Everyone below exclaims in shock and disgust as the waste-filled eggshells come raining down on them. The foul-smelling mixture splatters everywhere, causing the demons to cry out that they can't take this disgusting treatment anymore. The stench is overwhelming and the texture is revolting, but they have no choice but to endure it. Kratos enthusiastically shouts about farming and tells everyone to give it everything they have, because this agricultural project represents their best chance for survival. He begins outlining the step-by-step process for creating effective manure that will transform their barren land into fertile growing space. The first step in making proper manure involves combining seagull waste, eggshells, burnt tree ashes, and preparing the farm's soil foundation. All of these materials need to be gathered in sufficient quantities and prepared according to specific procedures that will maximize their effectiveness as fertilizer. The next crucial step requires grinding all of these materials together and mixing them thoroughly until they form a uniform consistency. Kratos addresses Sergei directly, instructing her to crush and grind all of the collected materials using her multiple arms, which should make the task more efficient. Sergei responds with outrage, asking why he wants her specifically to handle such a disgusting task. She points out that she's a powerful demon general, not some lowly servant who should be forced to work with waste materials. The degrading nature of the work seems beneath her status and dignity as one of the 4 great demon generals. Kratos responds by noting that she has multiple arms available, which makes her the most logical choice for tasks requiring manual dexterity and strength. He tells her to begin the work immediately, using a tone that brooks no argument or further complaints about the assignment. Sergei exclaims that she is the cold monarch Sergei, and her arms were definitely not meant for doing menial tasks like mixing excrement and other foul materials. The very suggestion offends her sense of importance and her position in the demon hierarchy, making her feel humiliated by the request. Kratos responds to her complaints by suggesting that if she finds the current task too difficult, he can give her something easier to do instead. He points toward where Azurat is still recovering from their previous battle, implying that she could join him in his current helpless state if she prefers that option. Understanding the implied threat perfectly, Sergei immediately gets to work without any further complaints or protests. She begins crushing and grinding the materials as instructed, realizing that compliance is much safer than continuing to argue with their increasingly unpredictable demon lord. Kratos thinks to himself that he got scared for a second there when Sergei started complaining, because all of these demon generals have extremely hot tempers and he absolutely must not let his guard down around them. However, he reminds himself that he is the demon lord now, and he needs to push forward with confidence, guts, and authoritative force to maintain his position. The second step in the manure-making process involves adding the right amount of water to create the proper consistency for effective fertilization. Kratos instructs Hart to fill the surrounding air with his magical fog, which will provide the moisture needed for the chemical processes to work correctly. Hart responds with confusion and disgust, asking why the Demon Lord would want to make the already terrible stench even harder to bear by adding moisture to the air. He points out that the humidity will intensify all the foul odors they're already struggling to endure, making the work environment even more unbearable. Rather than explaining his reasoning, Kratos simply points toward Azurath's location as a reminder of what happens to demons who question his orders too persistently. This implicit threat is enough to convince Hart to comply immediately with the request, regardless of his personal discomfort with the situation. Kratos asks Baal to evaluate whether the moisture level is sufficient for their needs. Baal examines the materials and confirms that everything has become appropriately soft after being soaked with water, exactly as Kratos predicted it would. The consistency now appears suitable for the next phase of the manure preparation process. Kratos thinks to himself about the third step in the process, which involves placing the prepared manure in a dry location and covering it with blankets made from seagull feathers. This will allow the materials to cure properly and develop the chemical properties needed for effective soil fertilization. However, he realizes that even just making a small amount of manure using their current methods would take an extremely long time to complete. In order to create enough fertilizer to cover the vast expanse of barren land in their territory, he has no choice but to mobilize every single demon under his command for this agricultural project. There's something about this plan that bothers Kratos on an emotional level, but he recognizes that it absolutely has to be done right now if they want to survive the coming challenges.